Hi, folks. Doyle Dykes here, and welcome to My Story, My Song. That's a song I wrote a long time ago. It was, I guess, around the late 90s, and I recorded it on an album called Zelf, Zelf, which we just put on downloads, or you can go to iTunes or whatever your favorite download store may be and download this. But it has a different cover than the one I have here. But Zelf is called Zelf, which is something I got while I was in Europe. I got the idea there from Rembrandt. They had all of his self portraits on display or on exhibit at the Mauritshuis Museum there in The Hague. So there were just billboards all over Europe. Zelf, Rembrandt, Zelf by himself. And so I asked the museum if I could actually put out an album and call it Doyle Dykes Zelf, a self-portrait on guitar. And so one of the songs I included on this was The Changing of the Guard. And so I was in Europe. It was actually at the big trade show in Frankfurt called the Music Messe. And I was playing for Taylor guitars, of course, and also Rivera amplifiers. So I was actually playing at a booth and right off the aisle, or sometimes I had to stand in the aisle to play. And every time I would play, I noticed this one guy. He was a soldier. And I didn't know it for sure, but I finally went to, because every time I'd play, he would show up. And I said, "Come here." I said, "You're one of us. You're one of our, are you a U.S. soldier here in Frankfurt?" He said, "What was it, the hair? Yeah, how'd you guess?" And I said, "I don't know. I just had a feeling." You could just tell, by his demeanor and his countenance. And so I got to talking to him and introduced myself. And I said, "I'm going to be praying for you." He told me he was a tank platoon commander, and I think at that time it was Bosnia, and he was there for a short leave, and he was a musician. He was a guitar player. And he says, "So I'm into music, even though I'm a master of destruction." I just loaded him down with CDs and picks and strings and whatever I had there, and I said, "I'll be praying for you, man." And it wasn't probably within 3 or 4 months, I got a letter from him saying what an impact that made on his life. That's why I call it the changing of the guard. He said, "I rededicated my heart back to God. God gave me my family back." And he had 5 little girls. And he said, and his wife there, they were in Frankfurt while he was in Bosnia most of the time. And he said, "God put my family back together, so I got my life back. I got my wife back, my family back, got my music back." It's kind of like a country music song played backwards. Got the dog back, the house back, and the car, and or the pickup truck. And so it was such a blessing to me. And his name was Sergeant First Class Aaron D. Jagger. That was his name. I'll never forget it, Sergeant Aaron Jagger. And he had a friend also he brought by named Matthew Kreth, who also was kind of in that same position there. And he rededicated his heart back to the Lord. And it was just an amazing thing. So I was on my way the next day to Italy to do some shows there. And I was riding in the back seat. I'm looking at my Rivera amp right now. You can't see it. But I was there with Paul Rivera. He was driving his little Passat. And David Magana, who was the international director for Taylor Guitars, was also riding in the front seat. And I was in the back, and like a little cubby hole they had made. There were amps and guitars everywhere. But I was just enjoying the scenery. We went all the way. Well, you left Germany, went over to Schaffhausen, crossed over the river, and then you're in Switzerland, and then went all through Switzerland and saw the Alps, and I was just looking out the window. And the whole time I had this song. It wouldn't leave me. It was in my head the whole time. And so I thought, well, when I get to the hotel, I'll see if I can remember this. And of course, how can you, like Tommy Emmanuel always said, if it's a song, how can you forget it? You don't have to write it down. But I was like, and it's all I could hear all day long. Love. And so when we got to the hotel, they checked us in the hotel. I had no idea what Lake Como was. You ever seen the James Bond Casino Royale movie? I believe it was. On the last scene, you see this big mansion, and it was on this incredible lake. That's Lake Como. And even though it was midnight, I couldn't even find the light switch. And so I somehow went over to the blinds, and I managed to open them. And I grabbed my guitar real quick because the moon was shining so brightly on the water, and I could see the Alps in the background. They were snow-capped, and it just took my breath away. I thought, and I mean, we were right on the water. You could look down, 2 or 3 stories and see the lake. And it was just one of the most amazing, even at midnight, it was incredible. So I grabbed my guitar, and it was like this, and I played the whole thing. I never changed a thing until I got back, and when I recorded it, and I made up that the beginning. But as I wrote this song, it all just came. I mean, I was in tears. I wept as I was playing it because I knew it was something very, very special. And so anyway, I just sort of hid it in my heart, and eventually recorded it with an orchestra, with strings, with Tom Keene. And I found out that Aaron Jagger, Sergeant Jagger, was stationed about an hour from our house. And so I somehow, I don't know how I found out how to get in touch with him, but I did. And he was on the phone. He said, "You're kidding. This is Doyle from Germany, from when I met in Germany with Taylor." I said, "Yeah." And I said, "Look, we'll have time to talk if you can go on this little trip." And I was playing at a men's breakfast outside of Atlanta, Georgia, for a good friend of mine. His name was Pastor James Bird. I'd known him since I was a teenager. And I said, "Can you come?" And he said, "Sure, man, I'd love to." I said, "Meet me at the Cracker Barrel at 5 o'clock. He said, "AM?" I said, "Yes." I thought he'd say, something about he was a soldier. No, he said, "No problem." And so we rode down from Dalton, Georgia, Cracker Barrel, down to the outskirts of Atlanta. And he gave his testimony. And so he told me, he said, if they'll let me retire, I'll go to a Bible school. And he had everything planned. And he said, I've been writing a lot of songs and Christian songs and ministering in my church and all this. I said, well, will you do something today? And I couldn't believe how good he was. I mean, he was an amazing guitar player and singer. And I went, keep going, And I said, can you give your testimony? And so I gave him about half the program, and we had an altar call, and there were guys that came and gave their hearts to the Lord that day. It was amazing. And I'll never forget that. And he says, I don't know if they'll let me retire if we go to war, with Iraq, and which we eventually did. And First Sergeant Aaron D. Jagger lost his life with a roadside bomb while he was in Iraq. And so, the good thing about it is he's in heaven today because he had a change in his life, the changing of the guard. That's what that song's all about. I was able to give him a copy before this album came out. I had a demo there with the strings and everything. He said, you're kidding. I played it in the car. He said, you wrote that? I said, in your honor, sir. And so the changing of the guard, that's my story. That's my song.